It was the summer of 2009 when 27-year-old Delia Crane first realized that the thing she loved most in the world was about to be taken from her by people who had never once gotten their hands dirty. The notice came on a Thursday, tucked between a seed catalog and a water bill, which felt almost insulting in its casualness. It was printed on heavy cream stock, the kind of paper that costs more per sheet than a dozen eggs, and it announced with cheerful corporate confidence that the Hargrove Group, a hospitality development company based out of Atlanta, had acquired the 400 acres of old Wickham timberland that bordered her property to the north. They were calling their project the Ridgeline Club, a boutique wilderness resort, 32 private cabins, a lodge, a farm-to-table restaurant, and a spa that would, according to the brochure insert, offer guests a chance to reconnect with the rhythms of the natural world. Let me paint you a picture of the natural world Delia already lived in. It wasn't a postcard. It was a working lavender farm in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. 80 acres that her grandmother, Ora Crane, had spent 40 years building from a weedy, exhausted cow pasture into something that smelled like heaven from half a mile away in July. The rows ran in long purple waves down the slope of the south-facing hill, and in the peak of bloom they hummed, not metaphorically, but literally, with the sound of 10,000 bees working the blossoms with the focused efficiency of a machine no one has ever been able to improve upon. The farm produced three things: culinary lavender for the specialty food market, dried bundles sold through a small mail-order catalog that Ora had started in 1987 on a typewriter, and small-batch essential oil that took 3 hours and a copper still to produce a single pound, but which aromatherapists and soap makers from Vermont to Oregon paid serious money to get their hands on. The neighbors and the people in town, the ones who had watched Delia come back home at 23 after her mother's death to help Ora, and then watched her stay after Ora's own passing 2 years later. They mostly saw a young woman doing something quaint, something nostalgic, something that would, in time, yield to reality. Mr. Abernethy at the farm supply store had said it plainly, in the kindly, blunt way of a man who'd known her since she was 7 years old and thought that licensed him to say whatever he pleased. He'd stopped her by the fertilizer bags one afternoon in early September, 2 months after the notice arrived. "Delia, girl, the Hargrove people are talking good money. They bought out the Wickham parcel for 3 times assessed value." He lowered his voice like he was sharing a secret. "Word is they're interested in your acreage, too. You think about it. A girl your age, alone out there. What are you going to do with 80 acres of flowers?" She'd smiled at him, which was easier than explaining. She'd bought her fertilizer and driven home. The man from the Hargrove Group arrived on a Wednesday in October, when the lavender had gone silver gray with the first cool nights, and the whole farm had that particular quality of quiet that only comes in the off-season, when the bees have settled in and the rows have stopped humming and the land just breathes. His name was Mr. Vicker. He arrived in a silver SUV that was still wearing a rental agency sticker, and he wore a jacket with the subtle, deliberate casualness of someone who had paid a great deal of money to look like he hadn't tried very hard. He did not come to the door. He stood in the gravel drive with his hands in his pockets, looking at the rows of dormant lavender with the expression of a man pricing a used car. Delia came out to meet him, her boots still carrying the mud from the south field. "Miss Crane," he said, offering his hand and a smile that had been practiced until all the warmth had been sanded out of it. "I'm the Regional Development Coordinator for the Hargrove Group. I imagine you've heard about our project up on the Wickham parcel." "I've heard," she said. "We're excited about what we're building." He gestured at the surrounding hills with the easy proprietary sweep of someone who already considered himself at home. The Ridgeline Club is going to be something genuinely special. 42,000 square feet of lodge space, private trails, a world-class spa. He paused. Our vision is a very specific kind of guest experience. Curated, controlled. He let that word sit. An agricultural operation next door, even a small, charming one, creates certain complications. Noise, odors, equipment. He said it the way people say certain things when they mean something else entirely. Delia looked at him. She waited. "We'd like to make you an offer," he continued. "A very fair one. Substantially above market. You'd be comfortable for a long time." He named a number. It was a lot of money. She won't pretend otherwise. It was the kind of number that meant something entirely different to a 27-year-old woman running an 80-acre farm alone than it meant to the people who had authorized it. She thought about Aura, about the typewriter, about 40 years. "The farm is not for sale, Mr. Vicker," she said. He tilted his head slightly, like a man recalibrating. "Miss Crane, construction on our project begins in the spring. There will be grading, blasting, heavy equipment. It is going to be," he said, choosing his words with surgical precision, "a significant disruption to the surrounding area. We want to make sure you're positioned to handle that." She heard the meaning beneath the meaning. "I understand," she said. "The farm is not for sale." He left, and she went back to the south field, and that should have been the end of the conversation. It was not. Spring came, and with it the machines. Now let me tell you what that actually meant. Because the word disruption is a very clean, bureaucratic word for something that was neither clean nor bureaucratic. It meant blasting that rattled every jar in her processing shed and sent the bees into confused, furious spirals for hours afterward. It meant the access road they cut along the northern ridge generated a permanent low cloud of red clay dust that settled on the lavender like a fine rust, coating the blossoms during peak bloom and muting the essential oil content in ways she could measure at the still. It meant diesel exhaust drifting south on the afternoon wind. It meant that the bees, whose navigation depends on scent as much as sight, were flying through a fog of petroleum and disturbed earth for the better part of 18 months. Her essential oil yield dropped by nearly 40% that first season. The culinary lavender she sent to her wholesale buyers came back with complaints about flavor notes. 2 clients who had been ordering from her for years quietly switched suppliers. She said nothing publicly. She recalculated her operating budget in the evenings, sitting at the same kitchen table where Aura had run the business for decades, and she made the numbers work by making them smaller. But it was something else that broke her open, and I want you to understand this part precisely because it matters. It was her grandmother's bees. Aura Crane had kept bees for 35 years, not as a side project, not as a hobby, as a partner operation to the farm. The bees pollinated the lavender, and in return produced a honey so particular to that specific piece of land. Those specific blossoms, that blend of wild clover and sourwood and mountain mint that grew in the field margins, that Aura had called it, only half-jokingly, a map of the property you could eat. It was amber going on gold, thick and slow pouring, with a floral finish that lingered in a way that commercial honey simply did not. It was not listed anywhere. It was not for sale to strangers. It was given as gifts, sent to old friends, kept in a specific place in the pantry for specific occasions. After 18 months of construction, 3 of Delia's strongest hives collapsed. The bees didn't die in ways she could document or explain to an insurance adjuster. They simply became confused. Listless, they stopped foraging with purpose. They drifted. She found them clustered in wrong places, on the wrong flowers, away from the hive in the cold. One morning she went out to check the apiary and found 2 hives silent in a way that hives are not supposed to be silent. She stood there in the field for a long time, longer than was useful, and she did something she had not permitted herself to do since Aura died. She cried. Now let me explain something about the knowledge Delia had been given, because this is the thing that people missed when they looked at her. They saw a young woman in muddy boots who had inherited a small farm and stubbornly refused to grow up and move on. What they could not see was what she carried. Aura Crane had been, among other things, a botanist by temperament, a self-taught soil scientist, and a woman who had spent 40 years observing the precise interaction between that specific land and everything she asked it to grow. She had kept journals, not one journal, a collection of them, dating back to 1971, stored in a cedar chest in the back bedroom that Delia had not been ready to open until the winter, after the second bad season. She opened the chest on a January evening when the wind was coming down off the ridge, hard enough to rattle the storm windows. She sat on the floor of the back bedroom for 3 hours, reading in chronological order by the light of a single lamp. The journals were not diaries. They were operational records. Rainfall by month, bloom times by row, oil yields correlated with temperatures during the budding phase, notes on which bee forage plantings had improved honey character and which had done nothing useful. They were meticulous, cross-referenced, and written in Aura's small, deliberate handwriting that Delia had known her whole life as the handwriting on birthday cards and recipe cards and the labels on jars. And then, in a journal from 1998, she found a section she had not known existed. Aura had written it in the year the county first began talking about widening the state highway 3 miles to the west, a project that had ultimately been scaled back, but which had, for 2 full years, seemed likely to bring significant traffic and noise to the farm's western border. She had spent 6 months researching windbreaks and sound barriers. She had written to the extension office at the agricultural college. She had driven to see a tree farm operated by a Mennonite family in the next county over and spent an afternoon talking to the man who ran it. The section was titled, in Aura's precise handwriting, Notes on Living Barriers. It was 4 pages of closely written text describing a layered planting system. Not a fence, not a wall, but a designed ecosystem. The outer edge, fast-growing silver maples and hybrid poplars for rapid height, and a visual block within 4 to 5 years. The middle layer, American arbor vitae and eastern red cedars for year-round density and sound absorption. The inner edge, closest to the farm, native plantings, wild bergamot, mountain mint, goldenrod, ironweed, chosen specifically for bee forage, to create an insulating corridor of familiar navigable scent between the disruption on the outside and the lavender on the inside, a buffer that would feed the very things it was meant to protect. Aura had even priced it out. She had written the nursery names in the margin. She had never planted it because the highway project was canceled. But she had planned it. She had done all the thinking. She had left the answer in the cedar chest, waiting for a problem that hadn't arrived yet. Delia sat on the floor of the back bedroom, holding the journal, and felt something shift in her chest. Not hope, exactly. Something older than hope. Something that felt like her grandmother's hand on the back of her neck. She had the plan. Now she needed the patience. The following spring, she began. She spent the last of her operating cushion. Every dollar she had set aside for equipment upgrades and contingencies, on trees. The nursery owner who delivered them, a weathered man named Mr. Collier who had been selling trees in the county for 30 years, stood in her drive looking at the staked saplings and the scale of what she intended. "That's a long planting for one person and one season," he said. Not unkindly, she said, "I'm not planning to do it in one season." He nodded slowly. He understood that kind of math. She planted in the fall and the spring for 2 years. She did it alone. The work was of a kind that is difficult to describe accurately because the words available for it, hard, exhausting, relentless, are the same words people use for things that are merely inconvenient. And this was not that. This was the kind of work that takes up residence in the body. She would wake in the morning already tired in the way of someone who has been working in their sleep. Her hands stopped feeling like her hands. Her back developed a specific deep ache that she began to think of as a second presence. Something that lived just to the right of her spine and had opinions about everything she did. The community watched. The community, as communities do when they have decided what they think about something, rendered its judgment in small, consistent ways. The feed store, the diner, the parking lot after Sunday service. She heard the versions secondhand because no one said them to her face. She's throwing good money after bad. Those sticks won't do anything for 10 years. The Hargrove people will outlast her. Bless her heart. That last one, in the particular register in which it was deployed, carrying the weight of a closed door. The low point came on a Tuesday in early November of the second year. She was on the northern slope in the rain, not the dramatic rain of a storm, but the gray, relentless, cold water rain of a late autumn afternoon that doesn't announce itself and doesn't stop. She had 6 more rows to dig before the ground hardened and the window closed for the season. Her boots had been wet since morning. The arbor vitae seedlings were lined up in their nursery bags behind her, patient as livestock waiting for water, and she was trying to count whether she had enough to finish the section or whether she was going to come up short again. She drove the spade into the ground and it hit rock. She moved 6 inches, rock again. She stood in the rain looking at the ridge where the Ridgeline Club's main lodge had been framed out and roofed over, lit by the work lights of the late crew, glowing orange through the gray afternoon like something from another country. She could hear the generators. She had been able to hear those generators for 18 months. For a moment. Not a long one, but a real one. The kind you don't talk about later because it's too close to the thing you're afraid of. She thought about the number Mr. Vicker had named. She thought about what it would feel like to not be tired, to sleep in a room where you couldn't hear the generators, to not be doing this. The spade slipped from her hands and landed in the mud. She stood there in the rain looking at the lodge. Then she looked at her hands. They were Aura's hands now. The knuckles, the calluses, the particular way the dirt had worked itself into the creases. She had not noticed that before. When had that happened? She picked up the spade. She dug the 6 rows. She planted the last arbor vitae in the dark by feel, the way you do when you know the work well enough that your hands know it without you. She went home and ate soup standing at the stove and went to bed. The Ridgeline Club opened in the spring of the 3rd year to the kind of coverage that money and good publicists can generate. There was a piece in a travel magazine. There was social media. There was a helicopter arrival option for guests coming from Atlanta. The helicopter passed over her northern ridge twice on the opening weekend, and the bees did not like it. But the trees had begun to work. The poplars had shot up in the way poplars do when you give them good soil and reasonable water, faster than anyone rational expects. Tall and rustling, creating a visual screen along the ridge that changed the light quality on the farm's northern slope. The cedars and arbor vitae behind them were slower, but they were coming in dense, their layered branches beginning to knit together, and along the inner edge, the native plantings she had seeded that first fall had spread in the way that native plantings do when they find their ground, with a quiet, unhurried certainty that is the opposite of cultivation, but looks when it works like intention. The bees found the bergamot in early May of that third year. Delia was in the south field, checking the lavender when she heard the sound shift. Not dramatically, but she had been listening to bees on that farm since she was a small child, and she heard it the way you hear when someone you love changes their breathing. A quality difference, a restoration of something that had been fractured. She went to the apiary that afternoon and sat in front of the hives for an hour, watching. The foragers were going out straight and purposeful. They were coming back heavy. They were using the flight paths they were supposed to use. The season that year was not what it had been before the construction, but it was better than the previous two. It was a direction. She rebuilt on a direction. The essential oil yield came back first, slowly. Then with gathering momentum, as the lavender responded to a growing season no longer compromised by clay dust. The honey followed. The bees, working the native forage corridor as well as the lavender now, began producing a honey of an entirely different character than what she had sold before, richer and more complex. Carrying the bergamot and mint and goldenrod in layers that changed as the season progressed, she did not have a name for it at first. She just bottled it carefully and put it in the pantry the way Ora had done, and waited to see if it was real. She sold nothing publicly. She had no website, no social presence, no marketing. She had her mail order catalog, which she maintained the way Ora had, by hand, by habit, by the slow accumulation of customers who found it and stayed. Her income was modest enough that the word modest is doing heavy work in that sentence. But her land was paid for, and her animals were fed, and she owed no one anything, and that was a form of freedom that does not photograph well, but which is entirely real. The first indication that something had changed came the following June. A woman named Ms. Ashby, a food writer, who had been at the Ridgeline Club for a long weekend and had grown tired of the menu's version of farm to table, which is to say, food that has been curated to resemble authenticity while remaining entirely comfortable, had taken a long walk on the second afternoon and found herself on the gravel lane that ran along the south edge of Delia's property. There was no sign. There was no farm stand. Exactly. There was a weathered wooden table near the lane gate where Delia set out whatever she had surplus that week. A jar or two of oil, a few bundles of dried lavender, occasionally honey, with a price card and a coffee can for cash. Miss Ashby had left $40 in the coffee can and taken 2 jars of the honey and 1 small bottle of essential oil. She had written nothing on the card because there was no card to write on. The piece appeared in an online food magazine 3 weeks later. Miss Ashby wrote about the Ridgeline Club with professional appreciation and personal detachment. Then she wrote 1 paragraph about the farm down the lane. She did not name the farm. She did not give directions. She described the honey as tasting like an argument between summer and autumn, and the essential oil as the most coherent thing she had smelled in years, and she noted with a dryness that the editor had wisely left intact that the most interesting thing at a luxury wilderness retreat was a weathered table with a coffee can next to a property that had refused to sell. The Ridgeline Club's concierge began receiving requests the following week. Is there a local farm nearby? Where can we get that honey the writer mentioned? Does the resort carry any lavender products from the farm next door? The concierge did not have answers because the resort did not have a relationship with the farm next door. They served lavender products in their spa, sourced from a supplier in Provence. Their restaurant's honey came from a distributor in Charlotte. They had, in the construction planning phase and in the years since, given very little thought to the 80-acre lavender farm on the other side of the ridge. The guests were not satisfied with the Provence lavender. They were not satisfied with the Charlotte honey. They were staying at a wilderness retreat. that marketed itself on the authenticity of its natural surroundings. And they wanted the thing that the food writer had found at a weathered table for $40. And they wanted to know why the resort that charged them $600 a night did not have it. The general manager of the Ridgeline Club, a man named Mr. Whitmore, drove down her lane on a Thursday afternoon in late August. His car was newer than Mr. Vickers had been, and he was younger, and his manner was more careful, stripped of the older man's easy condescension. He had learned, presumably, from the report of that first meeting. He came all the way to the porch. He introduced himself properly. He accepted the glass of water she offered. "Miss Crane," he said, "I'll be direct with you. We have a guest satisfaction issue that I believe you can help us address." She sat across from him in the porch chair that had been Aura's chair. She waited. "Our guests have been asking for your products, specifically your honey and your lavender oil." He paused. "We'd like to discuss a supply arrangement." Delia looked at the middle distance for a moment, at the line of trees along the northern ridge, taller now, the poplars silver in the late afternoon sun. She thought about Mr. Vickers' careful word, complications. "I'm not sure a supply arrangement would be compatible with my operation," she said. The words came out quiet and even. Mr. Whitmore had the grace to recognize them. His jaw tightened briefly. "I understand." She looked at him directly. "Tell me what you're proposing," she said. "Then I'll tell you what I'm willing to consider." The meeting that followed was not at a corporate table. It was at Aura's kitchen table, with Delia on one side, her attorney, a precise, unhurried man named Mr. Bassett from the county seat, on the other, and Mr. Whitmore and the resort's contracts manager across from them, with their papers and their professionally neutral expressions. Delia served coffee. She had made it strong. The terms were hers. She had spent the drive to the attorney's office 2 weeks earlier writing them in a small notebook, and she had written them the way Aura would have, in plain language, with numbers, without softening. She would supply the resort's restaurant with culinary lavender and single-origin honey, a fixed quantity per month, non-negotiable upward, because she would not stress her soil or her bees to meet a commercial volume she had not planned for. The price was not a wholesale price. It was her retail price, to which she added a 10% handling fee for the inconvenience of delivery. The resort spa would have the option to carry her essential oil in their retail shop. The same pricing structure. She would not customize, rebrand, or modify her product packaging to carry their logo. Her oil would carry her label, Crane Farm, Blue Ridge Mountains, hand-lettered in the same style Aura had used since 1987, or it would not appear in their shop at all. The helicopter tours would be rerouted. Her attorney placed a map on the table. The flight paths would be adjusted to avoid the northern half of her property, where the apiary and the primary lavender fields were located. The noise was disruptive to working bees. This was not a negotiating point. Mr. Whitmore's contracts manager began to speak about the operational complexity of rerouting approved flight paths. He spoke for some time. When he had finished, Delia looked at Mr. Whitmore, not the contracts manager. "Those are my terms," she said. "All of them." There was a silence of the kind that occurs when everyone in a room understands that a line has been drawn and the only remaining question is who is going to step across it. Mr. Whitmore picked up the pen. "Those terms are acceptable," he said. "We'll have a draft agreement to your attorney by end of week." She nodded. She did not smile. She refilled his coffee cup, which was the closest she came. "Now, I want to tell you what happened in the years that followed, because the story doesn't end at the signed agreement. The story goes on the way the farm went on, quietly, incrementally, in the direction of permanence. The contract with the Ridgeline Club gave Delia a stable income for the first time since she had come home at 23. She used it carefully. She did not expand the lavender acreage. She did not hire staff. She did not launch a website or cultivate a social media presence. She used the income to do the things the farm had needed for a long time. Reseal the processing shed roof. Replace the copper stills condensing coil. Order, for the first time in years, the precise seed varieties and soil amendments that Ora's journals specified, the ones that had gotten quietly unaffordable during the bad seasons. She also bought 3 hive nucs from a local beekeeper who was retiring, the man named Mr. Collier who had delivered her trees as it happened, and she started again with the honey the way Ora had started, slowly, without expectation, letting the bees decide. The living barrier on the northern ridge continued its work. The poplars grew past the roofline of the lodge. The arbor vitae formed a wall dense enough that in winter, when the trees were bare, the cedars still held. Sound that had once arrived at the farm, sharp and direct, now arrived muffled, distant, reduced by the time it crossed through those layers to something the bees could work alongside. The light from the resort's evening operations, which had once bled orange across the ridge, was now diffused to something so faint that on cloudy nights, the farm's eastern fields were as dark as they had been when Ora was alive. The Ridgeline Club, for its part, did a thing that Delia had not anticipated and which she found privately, with a satisfaction she kept mostly to herself, deeply satisfying. They began to use her in their marketing. Not her, exactly. Her story. Their website developed a page about their partnership with a local legacy farm. Their restaurant menu carried a note about the single origin honey. Their spa literature mentioned the Blue Ridge lavender oil, hand-distilled on a family farm that had operated in the area for more than 4 decades. They had spent 3 years trying to absorb her property into their vision. Now they were using her resistance to their vision as a selling point. She was the authentic thing that made them feel real. She told exactly one person what she thought about that. Mr. Bassett, her attorney, at the annual contract review, in 6 words. He thought it was funny. She thought it was just. The years accumulated the way good years do, without announcement. She became in the way of people who stay in one place and do one thing with consistent care, a kind of landmark. Young farmers from the surrounding counties found their way to her sometimes, the way young people find their way to the people who have done the thing they want to do. They came with questions about soil, about bees, about what to do when the pressure to sell became a weight you carried. She walked with them along the edge of the property, along the base of the tree line that had become, over the years, something more than a barrier, a habitat populated with woodpeckers and warblers, and a pair of red foxes that had denned in the root mass of the old poplars since the 3rd year. The land will tell you what it needs, she told them, if you stop long enough to listen. The hard part isn't the work. The hard part is the waiting. Anyone can work, but waiting while other people tell you you're wrong, waiting through the bad seasons, waiting for the trees to grow, waiting for the land to come back. That's the thing. That is the whole thing. One fall afternoon, when Delia was in her mid-40s and her hair had begun to go gray at the temples, in the particular way that Ora's had, she was at the copper still with her niece, a girl of 15 named Cora, who had Delia's same quality of stillness, that particular capacity for attending to a thing without being distracted from it. When the girl asked her a question, she asked, "Did you ever think about selling?" Delia was quiet for a moment, watching the distillate come down through the coil, that thin, clear stream that would go amber on contact with air. Once, she said, for about 30 seconds, on a Tuesday in the rain. Cora thought about that, and she asked, "What stopped you?" Delia handed her the collection vessel and let her hold it under the still. The smell of lavender filled the shed the way it always did, the way it had for 40 years before her, and would for 40 years after, if anyone was willing to do the work. She said, "I picked up the shovel," and she let that be the whole answer, because it was.